One pub a day is closing around the UK, but what is the story? Is it the rise in prices? Is it the rise in running costs? Today we're going to look at the history of the UK British pub and piece together a narrative.
So I think we probably need to start a little bit further back, sort of pre-1960s. We've all had our local pubs. They've all got different names. White Hart, Red Lion, they've all got a great history. But in terms of what they were, for most of the 19th and 20th century, pubs were very tightly regulated and very local. Alcohol sales were restricted to both what you could buy, how you could buy it, and when you could buy it. But pubs still functioned in a very social gathering space for working people. Certainly when I was growing up, pubs, you got your Coke and your crisp and you were kicked outside to sit on the pavement, really. And this culminated in sort of the First World War with the Defence of the Realm Act. And this introduced licensing controls that shaped pub culture for decades. What they actually did was they didn't like people, that munition factory workers would go to the pub at lunchtime and then they wouldn't come back. So they made the pub shut. And they kept that effectively up to about 1990 or something, 1995, I think they took away with that legislation. So for fundamentally 80 years, they shut the pub in the afternoon. Other things they were doing was, the 1920s to 1950s, lots of breweries owned their own pubs. So you had a local brewery with 40, 50, 60 pubs around it that took its beer from that one brewery, and you got these lovely little micro spaces which over time didn't quite work so well. The providers tended to shrink as old-fashioned brewing went out of fashion. There was things like Carling Black Label and Harp Lager became things that strangely people used to buy. And I speak as an ex-camera member. So I think we need to understand. As this business model continues, it's still very regulated, very local. Lots of HMRC are taking lots of money out of every penny that's brewed, but the population are quite happy to engage in it. You kind of get a situation where there may be 4 or 5 pubs in an area, but they were all full. And it wasn't a question of going to one or going to another or changing. It's what they did.
With the fact that the pubs were doing well between that time frame, how often does businesses confuse long-term stability with permanence?
Well, I think it happens an awful lot. I mean, you hear the stories of most businesses not lasting 5 years. They can have 2 or 3 very good years where things are going really well, but things are always changing. And the businesses fail when business owners don't recognise the pace of change. The high street has been very permanent or very stable for many years until quite recently, and now it isn't, which is why we're seeing so many big brands no longer on the high street. There are many examples. Think of anything that has failed in the last 20 years. There is a reason why it's failed, and it's probably because the business had some very good times and was making very good money and thought that their product was going to last forever. I mean, brewing is, the brewers were guilty of that and probably more than anybody. From your experience, what early warning signs tend to get ignored during good decades?
Probably the small increases that sort of build and compound when the business rates are going up, when overheads are increasing. You're not looking at, how much am I going to increase my traditional beer that I've always had at, I'm not going to quote prices, but let's say £5. You're not looking to increase that because you're scared you're gonna lose your regular customers. And most pubs that we see close, they're traditional pubs. They've always served a selection of traditional drinks. They say, I'm not going to have a Brewdog beer. I'm not going to have any of the sort of new IPAs because I'm a traditional pub, but those drinks are popular. They draw a different demographic. And just keeping to the question, it's ignoring the increases. It's not optimizing the business versus obviously changing in culture, changing the local demographic. And if I was to tell a story, I mean, obviously I've grown up in South London, and so, you know, in the area that I grew up with, we had pubs. You couldn't walk 5 minutes and there wasn't a pub you would go past. And those pubs, they shrank, they closed because they just didn't cater for the local demographic that was changing. And when all the sort of like the chains started opening up, like your Weatherspoons, your Edwards that started selling alcohol pops and drawing in the younger crowds, no one wanted to go to the traditional pub around the corner because everyone was...
There is that pandering, isn't there? In that for most businesses, the only decent client is the next one. If all you're doing is relying on the same people, particularly in a pub environment, you had 100 old time drinkers. In 5 years' time, you ain't going to have 100. You're going to have about 87 because 13 went up. So your business is dying. So how are you going to replace the 13? I'll call you out on one of those things. Things like alco pops were a thing, but I'm not sure not every pub needed to go that way.
No.
There were ways of doing things differently. And it is sad, I think, that so many either stayed exactly where they were and failed, or tried to go in a completely different direction. There wasn't as much variety in what people were doing as was possible.
Yeah, no, I agree. Thanks for calling me on that, because I think what I was trying to probably point out was just not diversifying. So, you know, there were some pubs that, you know, got a chef in and started to do your traditional roasts. Others, like, not getting a chef in. I've got my regulars, and those regulars then on a Sunday was like, well, I want my pint with a nice roast and a bisto gravy and a cut of beef, and I'm not going to go into details because it's going to make me hungry. But they, you know, they lost out on traditional custom because they didn't diversify.
Anyway, so let's do with 1980s. I think marked the beginning of structural decline. Supermarkets expanding alcohol sales, very aggressive. Drinking at home becomes much cheaper. People do drink more at home. At the same time, the working patterns are changing. People are working longer. Commuting begins to fragment a bit. Work socialising becomes less of a thing, as people, certainly in this area in London. People, I mean, certainly when I started work in London, you drank with the office on a Thursday. Well, the youngsters, when I was young, you drank with the office a couple of days a week. You were kicked out at 10 o'clock, and then you drank with people you lived with for the rest of the period of time. We have things like the 1960s Licensing Act, which extends pub opening hours. And we also have, as well as the supermarkets, you're also getting things like TVs in pubs. And that sort of approach, which again, prior to that period of time, no one, I mean, it's the same time as you get Premier Football starts turning up. That's probably the key driver to that. But a question to you is, what does it look like when demand erosion is gradual rather than sudden?
I guess a slow decline. I don't want to say a slow death, but I've just said it. And, but that is what happens. You know, the finances get eroded due to, and I'm doing it again where I'm going back to what I previously mentioned. But when you've got overheads that are declining cash flow in a pub, in a business, and nothing is done to combat that, you're not optimizing your pricing, you're not trying to diversify your range to not only keep your regular custom, but to attract new, where you're not introducing other ways to, like, whether or not it's like I don't know, most pubs had a pool table or a dart table, but some pubs didn't show the Premiership on the weekend, so you went to the pub that did. And when you're not keeping up with times, your destiny is to face the decline.
So, first rugby club I played for when I was at university was a club called Old Notting Hamens, which played out of a pub in central Nottingham. Those sorts of things have gone. Doesn't happen anymore. And they're almost like ancillary things that cause people to go back to the pub, and then it just stops. Now, it doesn't happen overnight. You know, you have the odd, for the rugby example, you have the odd day we didn't get a team out, and that's fine, it happens. And then you're getting a team out once every 2 months, and there's no one is sitting there going, actually, that is changing our pub. The pub was where the adults went.
Yeah.
And probably, certainly when I was growing up, where the adults were was where you wanted to be, because there wasn't very much else. There wasn't anything else.
Watch the game. I'm going to go to the pub. And
Yeah.
You still get that. You still get that.
Yeah.
But it's, you just have the few pubs that are the go-to. Like in my village, you have the larger pub, which will always show, you can choose. You've got cricket, you've got football, and whatever's popular on the day will dominate.
Any business which kind of relies on regulation to be there or not to be somewhere else, the minute you make that regulation drop, then someone's going to come up with something very similar. And the population will start moving. If the population like it and they prefer the change, they'll start moving in that direction. There are probably, if you go and think about it, there's probably loads of industries, whatever industries are good now, or there are loads that are going through that process, but it's continual.
So obviously in 1989, the beer orders forced large breweries to sell off pub estates, breaking traditional tie system, and this led to pub companies. So we saw obviously a boom of small, more independent pubs, obviously circulating across the local areas as opposed to the bigger chains.
But I suppose the one thing we need to kind of put in at this point is that prior to this, you tended to have a pub with probably 1 or 2 beers in it with no choice. And all the drinks in that pub came from the one pub supplier. And so the beer orders comes in place. So no, that's not good. You're either brewing or you're selling. Of course, so where you are, if you wanted to be a brewer, you had to get rid of all your pubs. If you wanted to be a pub and you had a brewery, you got rid of the brewery. So massive change. There were loads, weren't there, punch taverns. But what it did do is so many of these pubs were very old, and all the brewery cared about was how much beer they sold. Right? So when all these properties, and they probably haven't changed hands for 60, 70, 90, 100 and whatever it is years, but when they're now selling the properties, they're being surveyed and they're giving you floor space values, and people are starting to work out the sales based on the floor space. So the whole market is just absolutely turned on its head, where a pub that only ever did 100 grand a year in today's money, its floor space is such it needs to be doing £200,000 a year. There's no way it's going to do £200,000 a year, because that's the size of that is what it can do. To me, that is the real problem, and that's why this was such a big change, because you've got people for the first time ever trying to financially optimise what is going on, rather than just letting pubs who all they care about is selling how much beer they sell. So how often do you think asset values really override the business health?
Where the new cost of the premises, the rent that have increased, does not change the fact that the business turns over X amount. It's never going to be able to, one way or another, it will run into debt because of those rent obligations, unless they own the property outright and they're only paying for, obviously, your traditional overheads. But those pub owners or pub companies that have a lease to pay year on year will see increases, and unfortunately, that will lead to obviously them being priced out of their own premises.
I mean, the other thing, we've talked about this before in other videos, and by all means have a look to the other ones we've done. It's where it's where you have someone starts looking at the real grungy detail of your business, which is something you may have never looked at before, and you realise that you're not that someone investing outside money, third party money, but because your PLC or that sort of money, could get more of a return by putting their money somewhere else. And then you get companies that were probably very good in a particular space and understood the way their business worked, saying, well, hang on a second, we need to do this in half the floor space. And now that may not work. A shop or something, or a department store is a perfect example where you need to have a certain floor space to sell anything. If you only got half of it, you're probably going to sell a quarter. And that doesn't work. It's one way that these sorts of businesses start to decline. But it is strange. It's one of those businesses where you actually sell your beer before you've paid for it.
Yeah.
So the minute you've run out, you haven't got enough money to buy new beer, there's nowhere to go. And the pub companies know that, which is why they give you a lease whereby they give you the furniture and they give you a bit of credit, you give them a deposit, and then when you run out of money, they go and find someone else.
Yeah, and the question is, what's the relationship with your landlord? I'll give them the keys back.
Yeah.
And someone else has moved in.
Yeah.
So it's just like, okay. So
what about the 60 grand you owe the revenue then? Yeah. Anyway.
So the early 2000s introduced further pressures. So 2007 smoking ban. We all remember that because we got to come home smelling fresh
clean, yeah,
and clean. And
and you couldn't no longer smell foul beer when you went into a pub.
Yeah.
Stale beer.
You did smell other things, like for example the plumbing definitely needed somewhere. I won't go into that, but if you're from our time, you'll know what I'm talking about. But yeah,
I mean, how do you respond to the costs rising faster than pricing power?
The response is to make cuts or increase prices, and that's a very hard decision to make.
It's worse because pubs will still give pub owners or pub people who are running pubs a recommended retail price. So they what they can, they're limited for what they can buy. They're limited for what they can sell it for. The state has this horrible habit of whacking on a bit more beer duty just because they think they can, and it's like there is nowhere to go. The one I always find quite interesting is you say, well, I'm going to open a kitchen. You rented house, effectively a leased pub. I'm going to open a kitchen up, and the first thing the landlord does is increase your rent. You just absolutely stuffed, and you end up hitting a brick wall quite quickly, I think.
And that was the life of pubs. If you like what you heard, please do like and subscribe.